Okay, so welcome everybody to this research seminar with Ann-Sofie Isaksson, who is a researcher at the Institute. We're going to talk about internet connectivity and educational outcomes, evidence from Sub-Saharan Africa. Apart from being a researcher here, she is an associate professor at the University of Gothenburg, got your PhD in economics at the University of Gothenburg. And you wrote your dissertation on essays on institution, inequality, and development. And you've previously been at London School of Economics, the Nordic Africa Institute, and the Research Institute of Industrial Economics. And you're involved in this project at Gothenburg called Digital Development and Educational Outcomes in Sub-Saharan Africa, which I gather this talk is about. So in general, you've done a lot of research on empirical development, economics, and governance, and inequality, aid, and African development. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for reminding me what I've been up to. It's nice to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm actually employed here, but I'm based in Gothenburg. But I usually show up for like festive events, so it's about time I do some work, right? This is joint work with two colleagues in Göteborg, and it's very much work in progress, to the extent that I've been kind of running regressions at 3:00 tonight, this night, and been up all night. so I'm gonna, if I hold myself firmly like this, is so that I don't fall over, basically. But of course, input is extremely valuable at this stage. So any comments I can get would be great, and especially, I guess, from a crowd that is kind of from a mixed interdisciplinary background, it would be great. Okay, so I guess the background, the idea of the project, kind of underlying what we do, is that in poor countries with a very pressured educational systems and constraints in terms of like teaching material, access to qualified teachers, and also kind of constraints in terms of parents' ability to help their children, perhaps, with many having little education and basic literacy skills and so on. Maybe under these circumstances, the tools and materials provided from internet connectivity could kind of help ease these constraints. So that is kind of the background to what we're interested in looking at here. At the same time, we know that take-up of this technology is far from equal across groups. There are established like gender gaps, gaps across rural and urban areas, and across different socio-economic groups and so on. So it might also be that this could kind of add to existing educational inequalities. So that is kind of the short background to what we want to explore, if the spread of mobile internet in Sub-Saharan Africa has affected educational outcomes and inequalities. I guess the issue of the role of internet connectivity for education got a kind of new sense of urgency at the time of the pandemic, where practically overnight people's right to education hinged on them having connectivity at home. And this is also the time when we submitted the application to VR for this project. So I guess that was also kind of why we got financing for this project. It is also kind of following the pandemic, increasingly being recognized as a human right. Not that it's established in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it's acknowledged to be kind of central to be able to fulfill other human rights, such as the right to education or the right to free speech and information and so on. And we have seen a lot of increases a rapid increase in developing countries in particular over the last decade or so in the spread of internet connectivity. But still, a lot of primary and secondary school age children do not have an internet connection at home. And a big bunch of these guys live in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is also why we focus on Sub-Saharan Africa, which is kind of the region that is lagging behind the most.
Sorry, question clarification. Do you mean there's no mobile internet or there's no?
I'm gonna get to that in a bit, but we focus on mobile internet because that is what's primarily used.
No internet connectivity. They don't have a mobile phone.
They don't have like 3G or 4G coverage in kind of rural areas in large parts of the in many countries. So in Africa, the expansion. Okay, so now I get to that. So in Africa, the expansion of this mobile internet technology has kind of skipped a step because they have very limited fixed line telephone infrastructure. So they jumped straight to mobiles. And this is also the reason why using mobile internet is kind of the by far most common way to access the internet, as opposed to kind of fixed broadband connections. And this is also the fact that internet via mobile phones has been the first telecommunications infrastructure of any kind in many parts of these countries. The change is also very dramatic, of course. So this is kind of a reason why many point to kind of big transformative impacts of mobile internet connectivity in poor African countries. So we have seen a rapid increase in coverage and also in use of mobile internet, but there are important gaps that remain. And there are also strong disparities, as I've already touched upon, between men and women, between people in rural and urban areas, across different age groups, and socio-economic groups, of course. Seeing that connecting to the internet is costly, getting a mobile device is costly, paying for the kind of monthly fee costs money as well. Oops. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of mobile. God. Of mobile internet connectivity from 2023, so kind of recent estimates from GSMA, which is also the organization which we're using data from. This is a global organization of mobile operators. So they create global coverage or roaming maps to see at a very local level if there is 3G, 4G or 5G internet connectivity available. And they divide people into 3 categories depending on access and use of mobile internet. So first you have those that are actually connected, that use mobile internet. And then we have those who live in an area not covered by a mobile broadband network. This they refer to as the coverage gap. And then we have people who live in an area that is covered by mobile internet, but still don't use it. So this is called the usage gap.
Can you tell us how that's defined? I mean, is it a person who doesn't have a mobile phone, but they still might use another person?
I think this data is actually based on, the use data is actually based on surveys that they conduct with in these countries and ask people about use as well.
Okay, and that will include that they don't go to somebody who has a mobile phone and use it.
I'm not.
It's quite a common way of using a mobile phone.
Yeah. I think they probably incorporate that in because it's so common to share devices. Mm-hmm. So I think they would incorporate that. But I'm not sure actually. I should check that. But this is not the use data is not the data that we employ in this paper, but the coverage data rather. So this is just something that they compile to kind of get these aggregate statistics. Anyway, you can see that in Sub-Saharan Africa, both the coverage gap and the usage gap is biggest compared to the other, bigger than in the other regions. And this is despite them having had substantial growth. So we are actually using data from a bit further back in time, since we want to kind of capture this expansion. So if we instead have a look at equivalent figures from a few years back, this is from 2017, which is more kind of during the study period that we're looking at. We can see that here too, the largest coverage and usage gaps are in Sub-Saharan Africa. 40% of people in Sub-Saharan Africa at this time lived in areas that were not covered by the internet. And 38% lived in areas that were covered but still didn't use mobile internet. So there's been some developments, but there is still gaps. Okay, so in parallel to kind of this trend, we've been witnessing what has become widely known as a learning crisis in developing countries in general, but specifically Sub-Saharan Africa is often kind of highlighted here. There was a lot of focus back at the turn of the millennium, in the Millennium Development Goals. There was a lot of focus on increasing enrollment. They had this focus on universal primary education. So we had a big influx of students, children coming to schools, and many developing countries saw rapid increases in enrollment rates. And maybe, as it turns out, then the focus on quantity maybe came at the expense of quality to some extent. So there's been a lot of kind of reports of students finishing schools without any basic kind of literacy and numeracy skills. And this is also reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals that came after, where they instead then focus on, I don't remember the formulation, but focus on quality rather than quantity, so ensuring inclusive and quality education for all. So if we have a look at just to get a sense of the state of education in Sub-Saharan Africa, if we have a look at enrollment rates to begin with, or primary school and lower secondary school completion rates to be specific, we can see that even though there's been a lot of focus on boosting enrollment and getting students through the system, there's still kind of a long way to go. There are still like some 30% of children that do not finish primary school, and only about less than half of children finish lower secondary school, equivalent to högstadiet. And this is just to kind of show you equivalent figures, but for individual countries, for the latest estimates that are available, just to show you that there's also a lot of variation across countries. If you compare, say, Kenya with Uganda.
Can you explain how it can be over 100%?
Yeah, that is because it's like relative to the specific age group that's supposed to finish primary school. So if you have like a lot of older kids that have repeated grades, so you have more kids than they're supposed to be in that age group. But yeah, that's something that you react to when you see that figure. Okay, so as noted though, being enrolled in school is not necessarily the same as actually learning. And if you consider actual learning assessments, the figures are even more alarming. And to kind of shed light on this learning crisis, the World Bank and UNESCO have launched this concept of learning poverty, which they define as the share of children who cannot read and comprehend a simple text of around 150 words by the age of 10. And they compare assessments, PISA style kind of tests from different countries. And as you can see in Africa, nearly 90% or 86% of children at the age of 10 cannot read a short passage of text and understand what it means. So this is clearly kind of alarming, of course. And as you can see, Africa stands out quite a bit here. Okay, so we have two occurrences taking place in parallel. So a rapid increase in internet coverage and a learning crisis among school children in Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm not going to suggest that the former is causing the latter. So seminar is over. That was no, I'm not going to suggest that. Rather, we're interested in if the former can provide tools to help kind of counter the latter. Yeah. So now in slide, I don't know, I get to the aim of the study, which I've already kind of noted, right? It's to investigate the effect of 3G, 4G mobile network coverage on educational outcomes and inequalities in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we look specifically at literacy and numeracy among children in Tanzania and Uganda. Unfortunately, I have only got to the point where I've started analyzing the Tanzanian data. I have to get in more data on Uganda. So today I'm going to show preliminary findings for Tanzania. But this, the data set we're working with, they collect data from Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. So hopefully we can have some kind of East African focus in the end. So maybe the paper should be called Evidence from East Africa rather than Sub-Saharan Africa. I don't know. And we want to know if literacy and numeracy are impacted by this gradual diffusion of mobile network coverage, and also if effects vary across socioeconomic groups, across children enrolled and out of school, which is kind of important, seeing that the picture we looked at before with the big chunk of students that were actually not finishing primary school. And possible mechanisms. And just so you're not disappointed, I'm going to kind of not get to everything, because I haven't done everything yet, but this is kind of in real time developing as we speak. I hopefully come up with some ideas why we're here, and with comments from you as well. Yeah, so I think I've already motivated why it's relevant to consider this as in a poor country setting. It's because mobile phones is kind of a dramatic change in communication and information potential, and because of the large human capital constraints that they can help relieve. So just to kind of preview the preliminary results. Yes, I seem to find evidence for the spread of mobile network coverage affecting test scores of Tanzanian students, especially in this age group where most kids are enrolled. Actually find stronger treatment effects in disadvantaged groups, which is kind of encouraging. But we also see signs of this gender gaps. In terms of mechanisms, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. But I hopefully, we can connect with some school level data that is available, and also by comparing different groups, school children that are enrolled and children that are not enrolled. We can hopefully, and children in different age groups and so on. We can hopefully get at mechanisms to some extent. Okay, so this is just this is very much work in progress. I think I put this down at like 1:00 last night. But just to give kind of a rough sketch of the kind of theoretical mechanisms that are proposed in the literature. On the one hand, internet connectivity can have provide tools and materials and educational resources that are relevant both for students themselves and also for teachers that could aid them in their teaching, and also for parents, perhaps especially so in contexts where parents have little education themselves. And this is a long quote from a report in The Economists, where they kind of put it nicely, I think. From the perspective of student, it puts access to learning material and resources at the tips of their fingers, including not only the best prepared content, but also access to live or pre-recorded lessons led by the best teachers from around the world. The internet serves as a repository of knowledge that is not restricted by geography and available to anyone with connectivity. It allows the traditional schooling model to evolve, facilitating access to a wealth of education material. So this is very much, I would say, a best case scenario, but kind of, yeah, that could be the case, I guess. And from the perspective of teachers, they similarly note then that increased school connectivity and access to digital learning tools can provide numerous resources for teachers to enable them to both develop professionally and teach more effectively. In developing countries, higher internet penetration provides an opportunity to develop the skills of teachers in a cost-effective manner, which is particularly crucial when there is a shortage of qualified teachers. I do not have an equivalent quote for the relevance for parents, but I guess you can think of kind of parallel arguments here. I find myself Googling stuff when my kids ask me about, I don't know, Gustav Vasa-tiden, some history or something, yeah.
Sorry, could you pull the draper again? It's moving over the thing.
No?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. But ultimately then, I guess, what effects we will see will depend on what people use the internet for, right? Both what children, parents, and teachers use it for, and what they substitute away from while being online. So if you spend your time online playing games or scrolling some, very hypothetically, scrolling some idiotic reels, during time that you could otherwise have spent studying, this might come with negative effects even, right? For school results. And this is kind of a finding that is sometimes heard in rich countries, such as Sweden. We talk about screen time as something negative rather than as something enabling often. It's not so often lifted for developing countries, though, where with very much in terms of restrictions on the education system. On the other hand, then if you substitute away from, I don't know, something that's not helping your education, I don't know, playing sport, maybe that helps your education, I don't know, but towards reading and writing online and practicing those kind of skills, this could come with beneficial effects. But the overall effect is maybe ambiguous and depending on context. And here, as I've kind of touched upon, a common argument is that it's perhaps reasonable to expect the positive effects to dominate in a poor country setting, where the new technology could help tackle some of the constraints on the educational systems. In a rich country, maybe you spend time playing games rather than read a book. In a poor country, maybe you don't have a book to read, as some kind of, maybe that's the reading you get is from the online activity. So it's a bit of a difference. And then to make things even more complicated, there are a bunch of indirect effects that could come from other effects of internet penetration on like economic activity and the labor market and so on, but maybe operating over the longer term. And also, these arguments hinge on actually using the internet in these areas with coverage. So what effects you observe will also depend on take-up of the new technology, right? Which we know. I can tell you at this stage that it's correlated with the self-reported internet use, but also that it varies across groups. So we'll have a look at that later on. Okay, so I'm starting to get tired of hearing my own voice. I'm gonna speak. I'm gonna be kind of quick on the literature here, but I can note that we will contribute, I hope, to a couple of strands of literature. First, there's this big literature on the transformative impacts of the spread of ICT in developing countries. They look at a bunch of different outcomes. There are a few quite influential papers looking at local employment, household welfare effects, local economic growth, political outcomes such as political participation, protesting, and so on. So it's related to this literature.
And I use the acronym ICT, but you mean anything else than just using mobiles?
No. I mean, these studies, some of these studies, I think all of these studies focus actually on, all of them focus on the internet. Not everyone focuses on mobile internet. So ICT, maybe it's kind of a diffuse term, but information and communication technology, well, internet connectivity, let's put it that way. And some of them focus on mobile internet and other on kind of broadband. Perhaps more so we contribute to the literature than on ICT. Okay, internet connectivity and educational outcomes. But okay, here actually ICT is a better word because this is not only focusing on internet connectivity. Here you have, for instance, one strand of this literature that looks at providing students with computers, basically. This big laptop, one laptop per child project and so on. And they generally are not finding very encouraging results. No or negative effects, basically, on educational outcomes. So simply providing people with computers, not very much evidence on positive outcomes here. And then we have another strand of this literature that focuses on, or maybe again ICT is a better word than internet connectivity, because here then it's focusing on kind of often providing software or targeted technology-aided learning programs. So these are interventions that focus more specifically on education and to help students and teachers in their teaching or learning process. And looking at these more targeted interventions, many in developing countries, there are more optimistic findings. But now I come to more of a focus on internet connectivity. Another strand focuses on internet connectivity in schools with mixed findings, in line with the idea of kids just playing game and diverting time from studying. These guys find negative effects of broadband use on test scores in Portuguese schools, for instance. And maybe the strand of the literature that we are mostly relate to is rather than the strand that focuses on internet connectivity at home, or that doesn't distinguish between internet connectivity at home or in school. here there are some papers on rich countries, high-income countries, again with kind of mixed findings. Looking at basically they look at broadband speed, so having more and better internet rather than going from having none to having internet connection. And we also have a couple of studies from middle-income countries, from Peru and Brazil, finding no effect on test scores. So I guess the paper that we are our study mostly relates to is the last one here, by Besone and co-authors, not yet published. They also look at the rollout of mobile internet, but in Brazil, and comparing test scores in schools, finding no effect on literacy and numeracy. So summing up, we kind of contribute then to two major strands. The literature on kind of the broad transformative impacts of the spread of ICT, or the spread of internet connectivity rather than, and the literature on ICT and educational outcomes, and in that literature particularly the sub-strand focusing on internet connectivity at home. Okay, so to the best of my knowledge, at least, this is the first study to study this in the very poorest countries, so in Sub-Saharan Africa. I think the paper from Brazil is the closest we get, so kind of more middle-income countries. And this, I think, is a contribution in itself for these reasons that I've already kind of mentioned. The severe constraints we have and the big transformative change that internet connectivity came with in this setting. Also, by focusing on, unlike studies from rich countries, which tend to kind of focus on getting faster internet, more and better internet, we look at the extensive rather than the intensive margin. Focus on to the spread of internet to areas that were previously and recently unconnected. Study internet connectivity broadly. Meaning that we capture kind of general equilibrium effects, as economists like to call it. So all of these indirect and direct effects bundled together. And this, I guess, is a contribution in that it provides a fuller picture, perhaps, but at the same time a challenge because it's a bit of a black box, right? And it's something that you kind of want to have to dig into what the possible estimated effects actually mean. And also, I think a good feature with with our study is that it allows us, the data we have allows us to look at both children in school and children out of school. So the tests are based on home visits, which is important then in countries where school dropouts are common. Okay, how am I for time? Fine. Good. Seeing that I'm just entering the data and empirical strategy bit of the at least 10 minutes more. Okay, then. Okay, so we use data on the spread of 3G, 4G network coverage, and we geographically match this with the data on literacy and numeracy tests of, we will have more than 300,000 observations when we consider both Uganda and Tanzania, but the results I'm showing today is around 200,000 students, children between ages 6 and 16 in Tanzania during this period of kind of rapid expansion of internet coverage. Okay, so I don't have time to dwell on the data very much, perhaps then, since we are, I have 10 minutes left, but I can at least say that they provide maps this organization of mobile operators. They provide maps divided into kind of grid cells that are very detailed. And for each grid cell, this is a global coverage. So this is available for the entire world. And it's licensed, so you have to pay for it, unfortunately, but it's doable if you apply for money for it. And for each cell, they indicate if it has 3G and 4G coverage, and also the signal strength. But we're basically just using if they have it or not. Or 5G, of course, in richer countries, but in the African setting, and during this time period, it was mostly 3G and 4G. And we also complement this data with data from OpenCellID, which is publicly available, and provide information on where cell towers are located and signal strength as well, so we can kind of get to combine that with that data. Okay, and we match this with the literacy and numeracy test scores, because in this test score data we have ward names, which is an administrative division in Tanzania that is like a small town could be a ward. A bigger town is usually divided into several wards. In a rural area, it's maybe a few villages can be a ward. So there are I think some 3,000 wards in Tanzania in the data. So since we have those names, we can kind of geolocate the children and see if the ward is located in a cell with reported 3G and 4G coverage at the time of the survey.
Sorry, just because the ward names for school districts, or what is that?
No, it's kind of a administrative division below the district level. Oh. So it's not school districts, it's more detailed than that. I think, I don't know about school districts, how detailed they are, but it's some 3,000 at least in Tanzania, so there's quite many of them. Yes. And this data on literacy and numeracy is collected by an East African NGO called UVESO. And they survey households at home. So they collect information from household members about their household. And they also then conduct literacy and numeracy tests with all children in the household. Meaning that we capture people who don't go to school as well. And all children, irrespective of how old they are given the same test. So this is a kind of a test that is supposed to capture where you were supposed to be at skill-wise when you finish the second year of primary school. And they ask kind of increasingly difficult questions. So the level you stop at, I mean, if you are 10 years old, you should be able to complete them all. But if you're 7 years old, you will get lower points, naturally. And this is just a picture from UVESO themselves when they conduct these surveys or these tests. So in terms of literacy then, they are asked to undertake a number of tasks with kind of an increasing level of difficulty. So first they're just asked to read letters from the alphabet, and then they're asked to read words, and then they're asked to read a paragraph. And if you don't manage to do this, you stop at that level. But if you manage to do it, you get to continue to the next question, kind of. And so if you after you read words, you get to read a paragraph, and finally you get to read a short story followed by comprehension questions. So if you're 10 years old, you should hopefully be able to do that. And they have these literacy questions in Swahili, which most Tanzanian students actually do quite well in. But they also do it in English, and there it's much lower scores, naturally. And it's similar with the numeracy tests. You start by basic questions and get to more and more difficult questions. So basic number recognition, knowing what numbers that are presented to you. Comparison of numbers, which one is largest and so on. Addition and subtraction. And in some rounds, multiplication and division. But I'm just going to stop at subtraction here, because it varies across rounds, the higher levels. So as dependent variable, I'm going to be using in the main estimations an index that capture all of these English, Swahili, and math test scores. So kind of get an overall grade for the student. And for the treatment variable, or for the internet exposure variable, it's going to be if the child lives in a cell or in a ward that in turn is in a cell that was covered by 3G or 4G at the time of the survey. So this is just to get a sense of the share of children treated. We see that it increases over time, from the first round to the last round we look at in the data. So from somewhere below 10% to nearly 25% of the children live in areas with coverage. I don't know how informative this figure is, but this is just the average test scores for 15, 12, and 10-year-olds, and naturally they are higher the older you are, right? But I guess the main takeaway is that in line with this learning crisis I talked about earlier, we don't see any progression over time or any improvements over time. It's rather kind of a flat or decreasing trend here. If we break it down and look at the individual subjects that go into this index, we can see actually that it's Swahili is. We see some improvements in Swahili. This is for 12-year-olds. In math...
So I just have to ask a question. I mean, if I remember correctly, the language in Uganda is Luganda. And Swahili is just taught as an optional subject in schools.
But this is in Tanzania.
That's Tanzania.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
But
so in Uganda, which I haven't got all the data for yet, they actually ask in local languages instead. So this is Tanzania. So... in math, kind of flat. In English, it's going downhill over the period. Okay. So I'm fascinated I haven't been interrupted yet. Who's going to tell me, well, how can you possibly get to any causal estimates of studying this? And I mean, who uses the internet is clearly not random, right? By focusing on coverage rather than usage, we kind of take away the part of the endogeneity that has to do with the individual kind of household consumption decisions. So how much you consume yourself, which will tend to be richer households or being better connected. But still, mobile operators do not expand their coverage randomly either. So it will be profit maximizing firms that seek to kind of establish in areas that are profitable. So that's not random either. And people living within the footprint of a mobile broadband network then will differ from people that don't do so. And how will we approach this? Yeah. We're going to do a whole bunch of stuff then, I guess. Kind of compensate for not having a random variation. You have to do a lot of different stuff. So what we try to do is kind of establish a credible control group in different ways. And I'm at a very early stage in these estimations. But with this local variation that we have geographically, and also with variation over time in coverage, both in internet coverage and in the rollout of the survey, we're in a quite good position, I think, to control at quite local level for confounding factors and unobserved variation. So we compare children that happen to be surveyed after the arrival of mobile internet with children that were surveyed before the arrival of mobile internet, and control for kind of district by survey year fixed effects. So meaning that we compare, we account for kind of differences in time trends between districts and compare children in the same district in the same year, conditional on a lot of other variables as well. And then we run estimations where we, instead of comparing treated to treated or covered to not covered areas in general. We compare treated and soon treated areas that we know got internet coverage kind of shortly after the survey reached that area. And then we use an event study specification, so we can look at pre-trends and also look at dynamic effects of depending on for how long you had internet connectivity. And then we do a matching strategy where we kind of match exactly on covariates and run estimations on the matched sample. So yeah, we can only do as much, right? But if results are robust across a wide range of different approaches and specifications, maybe that, speaks to the advantage of getting closer to being able to estimate a causal effect. Yeah, this is late night writing, so I hope I get all the subscripts and everything right. But this is just to get a sense of our baseline specification, where we consider internet coverage in a ward at a specific year, and district by surveyor fixed effects, individual and household level controls, and the effects then on test scores of children in a ward in a year T. And this is just what I basically already said with comparing treated and soon treated instead. Okay, so now I'm going to try to get some results before before ending.
It's calculated, so you have a little bit more time because we started late.
Okay, great. I don't know how much of these empirical econometrics type of seminars you have. But anyway, we tend to see then positive treatment effects of being in a ward that was covered at the time of the survey, and comparing to this is conditional on very local kind of or district by year fixed effects. And here we compare with those that are soon to be treated. And here we can see that we have a positive parameter on that one as well. Do we want to have that? No, I guess not. But I think it goes to show that there's, it kind of highlights the selection effects that are there. That these are also areas that maybe are selected on the basis of commercial potential and children having higher scores to begin with. So what we do is that we compare this parameter with that one. So this is the difference between the two. And to kind of subtract kind of this placebo selection effect from the kind of observed treatment effect. This could also, I guess, capture, which we will see in a bit, that we have likely lagging reporting of 3G, 4G coverage. Our measure is dependent on mobile operators actually reporting in their coverage. And if they don't, until someone reminds them, we're going to have a lag. I think we're going to underestimate coverage rather than overestimate it. Because people tend to maybe not be too quick to report. And that could also be picked up here, that these guys are already starting to actually get coverage, and it shows up in this soon treated indicator. And here we see we have a smaller sample here. This is because in this estimation, I restrict the sample to only consist of those that are treated and those that soon will be treated, for kind of to get a more narrow comparison. And we see that students have about a 3 percentage point higher test score in this setup as well. So these are the event study estimates that I was talking about. So here, the leads and the lags show you how many years ahead or after the year of coverage that you are the year of first coverage that you are observed. So ideally, you don't want to see any pre-trends, and you want to see positive treatment effects after. And I think, we can see that something is starting to happen already a couple of years before, which I think probably reflects the lagging reporting. That there may already be internet connectivity to some extent, so it kind of a spillover to the control group. But then there seems to be kind of consistent treatment effects following 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years after the reported arrival of mobile internet compared to before. And this is just to break it down and look at for English, Swahili, and numeracy. I had the suspicion that it was maybe driven by just, for instance, English, because you saw a kind of a clear trend there. But it seems to be present for all the subparts of the index independent variable. This is looking at treatment effects at different ages, because it was just an average over all ages that we looked at before. And here, I think this makes kind of sense to me, that at the very youngest ages, they're not expected to know much of that stuff anyway in the test, right? But we see the largest effects in the age groups from like 7, 8, 9, 10, or 8, 9, 10, maybe, which is also kind of the time when most kids are enrolled. So before dropping out, basically. And then we don't see much in the oldest age groups. Which could be because they use internet for other stuff, or because there's not much variation, because they still know much of the stuff that they're supposed to know at level 2 in primary school when they're like 13, 14, 15. It's probably the most likely explanation for that. Okay, so what am I doing here? It's a good question. Yeah, so this is, I was saying before that I was going to compare if it's actually the case that we see higher internet use among those living in covered areas. And to explore this, I use data from the Afrobarometer, which actually have questions on where they ask people how often they use the internet. And we can see that there's a kind of a quite strong positive correlation between coverage and internet use, conditional on a bunch of stuff. This is not a very big sample, but it's the Afrobarometer sample for Tanzania for a few rounds of the Afrobarometer in Tanzania. They have like 1,200 per round or something like that, I think. And this is to see if this we know that there are inequalities in terms of take-up, and this is just to explore that a bit more. And here we can see that adoption varies across groups. The relationship between being treated, living in a treated area, and reporting to use the internet is stronger for younger people. This is below 30, I think, which I guess makes sense. And it is stronger among more educated people. It is weaker among poor people. Somewhat stronger, but not that much among males. So does this... Okay, so now, before I'm confusing you maybe, because this was still with the Afrobarometer data, looking at the relationship between take-up and coverage. But now we go back to the data used for the analysis in this paper, focusing on test scores to see if these types of differences in take-up also translates into differences in estimated treatment effects between different groups. And to some extent, yes, we see signs of this gender gap in the interaction effects of looking at being a girl that is treated or having a female household head. Weaker treatment effects in these groups. But actually stronger treatment effects among the poorer, or weaker among the richer, if you put it that way. And also stronger among the less educated, or weaker among the more educated, which is despite of them having lower take-up, they get stronger treatment effects, which is because maybe the tools available have more to offer for these guys. I don't know. I haven't had time to think yet.
Okay. It's time to wrap up.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, this is just for the individual. This is doing matching, finding the same thing. Okay. Yeah, there's a big to-do list, I guess. I want to extend the analysis to include Uganda and possibly Kenya, if I can get the geographic information for Kenya to be able to geolocate the kids. Yeah, whatever we can do to explore mechanisms. I think this data set that we're using with the test scores, they're also surveying schools. And for a subsample of the kids, it's possible to connect the kids to specific schools that they go to. And for the schools, they have questions about different availability of different infrastructures and teachers and so on. So my hope is that this connecting the data we're using to the school data can help us get at mechanisms more. I want to compare results for children that are enrolled and children that have dropped out of schools. Compare results by school type, public, private. Yeah, there are also questions in some of the rounds that are interesting that asks about parents' engagement with kids, about if they read a book with the kids, for instance, during the last week, if they have kind of engaged with teachers, asking about student performance, if they have books at home. So that could also be something that we can potentially use. Yeah, I think I'm done. I've said this. This is very preliminary, so take it with a grain of salt. But we'll hopefully develop shortly with your input. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure there's many questions. I have many questions, but of course we should have questions from the audience. And you guys sit here, put up a hand for a question and a finger for a follow-up. And you that are online, use the chat function. So write if you wish to ask a question, you should just write that you want to do that in the chat, write your name and what field you are from. And if you want to ask a follow-up, just write the name of the person you want to follow up to. Very good. And I'll take the opportunity to ask the first question. There was just maybe I find this extremely interesting, as you noticed. It seemed that you focused on how this mobile connectivity can be used directly for studying purposes. But it seems that there are a lot of other effects on it that will have a positive effect on your educational outcome. So, for example, health and access to healthcare. And I know in Uganda, and actually I know that Stefan Swartling-Pettersson is online, and he will correct anything wrong I say about Uganda. He might be even sitting in Uganda. But they use that, I don't know how much they rolled it out, but you can get now access to healthcare by doctors being in the city, connecting to a nurse and nurse assistant out somewhere, and you get much better healthcare in that way. And of course, that will affect also the educational outcome if you're more healthy. So I wonder if that's something you're thinking about. It can be other things also, like income, business opportunities. And maybe, I looked at your data, so that could perhaps explain why it was worse, less of an effect on girls, because they usually also get less health care. On the other hand, you had a nice graph showing the difference between age, and that is not directly kind of easy to understand why that would be, depending on these other things, but maybe there's an explanation. And but it was also noticeable that you had a greater effect on poor people. So these poor people are getting access to more healthcare if they live in remote areas now because of this internet connectivity.
Yes, I'm. For sure about these indirect effects. I mean, if you look at the I happen to have that slide coming up here right now on the transformative impacts. It's they found positive effects of internet connectivity on local employment, on household welfare, and so on. So if exactly, so if as you're saying, maybe I don't know how immediate these possible effects would be, or if it's operating over the longer term, but for sure, health could be a constraint, or if your family has a better economic standing and you don't have less malnourishment, for example, which is, I guess, something that's very much restricting student performance. So yeah, for sure. I don't know really how to kind of disentangle all of these indirect possible effects. I think I will need to kind of develop or try to be precise when I write up this paper, but some kind of conceptual framework where we kind of get an overview of,
maybe
of
you
both.
Be agnostic on it. It just has this effect and it can take many routes.
Yeah.
It's very hard to distinguish.
You
can.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to distinguish it.
Yeah, but I think when I've been working with kind of similar types of data, but focusing on different stuff with like aid data, I always get comments on, but this is a line of a black box, and how can you get at the mechanisms? And so it's you would want to do that, but maybe it is difficult for sure, especially with all the indirect.
With the policy relevance, I think it might not be so important.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, yeah. But I think the way to go would be to, or I hope at least that you could get at something by looking at the sources of heterogeneity, so for instance, across different age groups and across children in and out of school and so on, to be able to rule out or to speak in favor of some mechanism ahead of another. I forgot. Well, you had more questions. That was the one.
Now you mentioned this, but before, but you were thinking it's a direct kind of using it for educational purposes, but it seemed to be all these other positive effects that will also affect your educational outcome.
Yes,
so that's
everything is bunched up in this little estimated parameter, unfortunately, or luckily, I don't know.
That's good. Anyway. So we will have a question directly, perhaps even from Uganda, by Stefan Swartling-Pettersson. What is he writing? What is that? Oh, there is. It's coming
Thanks
up there.
a lot.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we're going to increase the volume a little bit so we can hear your voice better.
Testing. Greetings from Kampala. Can you see me?
Excellent. Now we can hear you and see you. Amazing. Love to see you.
Too bad I didn't
Thanks
have
a
the
lot.
results.
This was fascinating. I'm a public health physician, public health background, and a professor at Makerere University, which you see me behind me. Let's see. Okay. Anyhow, and of recent affiliated to the Institute for Future Studies. So fantastic. I was intrigued, coming from a different scientific background. Would you call this an ecological study of ward level, or is this sort of a study of individual children clustered at the ward level, etc.? That's sort of a methodological question. But then I guess where you already started is how does this link to general socioeconomic development, and what do you know about the individual child and the household, and to what extent can you characterize the ward from some multidimensional poverty measure or other to try to look at this? I mean, ecological studies are fascinating, but also frustrating at times because it's hard to get at mechanisms. So that's my number one. I have a number two, if I may. But maybe if you want to take this, or should I go ahead?
You can decide.
Well, the other one is more of an
go.
encouragement, because Tanzania during COVID decided that COVID didn't exist, as you know, and kept schools open, while Uganda closed down schools for 2 years. So I think you could have very interesting cohort effects to compare between the two countries as you get to the Uganda data, if you get your lag times and all of those things right. And thirdly and finally, it's an offer. I know the head of demography and statistics at Makerere. She sits on the Uganda Bureau of Statistics board, and they are just getting the census data from Uganda for last year. I'd be happy to introduce you if you want to explore interactions with census data. Thanks.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Thank you. I can for sure contact you afterwards about that. Okay, so let's see. COVID, that would be interesting to explore. At this stage, I'm in the pre-pandemic period in the Tanzanian data. I'm a bit afraid of the pandemic period because so much is going on, and but it could be interesting to compare Uganda and Tanzania if their experiences are very different during school closures. So that was a good suggestion. In terms of your first question, I guess we don't use the kind of same terminology in economics really, but here we have like the variation in treatment is at the ward level, and we also have information at the individual level. It's not very rich. It's and at the household level as well. We have like information of the age and gender of the child, and some household characteristics and so on the education of the household head, the female-headed households, and some stuff like that. Also some asset index that we can get at economic standing, that I explore kind of heterogeneities along those dimensions. I think to use ward-level indicators would be interesting. I've been thinking of if you could kind of create some variables averaging over or aggregating over the wards, maybe in terms of socioeconomic conditions, or maybe in terms of like conditions among the adult population rather than the children, perhaps. So that is something I want to look into more. I don't know if that answered your question really. I need a pen. This one is not working, so I can take some notes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. It would be fun to follow this. Look at multidimensional poverty indicators and how far down they reach. I'm sure they're at district level, but maybe I'm not sure whether they are at what county or ward level yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're happy with that? With the answers? Good. Okay, then we move on to the next question. Felicia? Wait. The microphone is coming.
Hi, yes, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I have two questions. So one question is about the countries that you're looking at. I realized that seems to be because of the availability of data, but you mentioned several times in the presentation that the Sub-Saharan Africa focus is the focus on the poorest region of the world as well, but actually not Uganda, but Tanzania and Kenya are low middle income countries, and only Uganda is a low income country. So I was wondering if this like kind of interaction between the different countries in terms of economic disparity is something that you have considered. I saw you only have so far looked at the Tanzanian data, but perhaps rather than this being an issue, it can be an opportunity to also compare these socioeconomic differences, because you're looking at countries that are slightly different. But I'm also wondering how this affects kind of the regional comparison based on the literature that you brought up. where this literature had seen no or a slightly negative, what I interpreted as effect in middle income countries. And then I was wondering, but perhaps this is a completely different study, but considering these difficulties with causation and correlation, if you've considered at all having like any minor case studies in, like, for example, at ward level to do interviews or anything to get a little bit more qualitative data on how internet is actually used. But perhaps that's, when this is done, you do that or something. I don't know.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. First, you're absolutely right about the selection of countries. That this is because we have this detailed test score data from these countries. I was surprised to hear and kind of amazed to hear that so Tanzania has a kind of advanced to a lower middle income country. Yeah. Okay. Good for them.
Yeah,
there's so many that's moved on.
Okay then. That is something that I should, of course, know and note. In terms of, the only paper from kind of a developing country context that I was referring to, focusing on specifically on these kind of things, was one from Brazil. So I think there's still, a lot of scope to do work in Sub-Saharan Africa. But of course, maybe it's claiming too much to kind of frame it as some kind of Sub-Saharan African. As I was kind of mentioning some time, maybe I should switch to East Africa or something because of the focus. I would love to incorporate more countries, but I'm not aware of any comparable data that I can use that have these. It's crucial to be able to kind of geolocate kids to know that if they have coverage or not. And quite often in these the household surveys and so on, sometimes you get the location of where they are at a detailed level, but sometimes you only get like the district, for instance, which is not detailed enough for the purpose. But that is something that is worth discussing in terms of generalizability to other African countries, and maybe I should kind of limit my claims and not speak of kind of Sub-Saharan Africa to the same extent. Minor case study, that would be great. I think we have actually funding. For not any big kind of data collection efforts, but connecting up with some NGOs working. They have these ongoing projects. You
can send Felicia.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, but I was thinking because you have this, perhaps it's possible to do something since you're already collecting this literacy data to even with that organization introduce some questions.
Yeah, SIDA are supporting this USO NGO, so there are like Swedish connections as well. If they do so still, but they used to support them at least. You never know these days. But so there should be, and also this GSMA organization. They have like a research branch that is called like Mobile for Development or something like that. They have a lot of like specific projects going on. Yesterday I saw some report on some piloting sites in Tanzania where some mobile operators had started kind of in a collaborative project around 2017 sometime. So that would be interesting as well to kind of focus in on those pilot areas. I don't know if I responded to all of your questions and comments, but yes, I'm all for.
Very good. Then we move on to the gentleman next to you, Ben.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Because we're at the Institute for Future Studies, and I'm not at all.
Oh God! No, I'm scared now.
I have a future. No, it's playing fast and loose with the idea of future, but I would say I'm curious it's far outside of your study, but what happens to these children in the best case scenario? And I will give a reason for asking this question, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with scholar Patricia Kingori's work on shadow scholars in Kenya. There's an interesting documentary now making the rounds.
Patricia
Kingori, she's at Oxford. I can send you a reference.
Yeah, please.
But basically the argument is that Kenya has overproduced through higher education like highly networked scholars and PhDs who can't find jobs. And what happens is that there's a very lucrative, compared to jobs they can find, marketplace in writing, ghostwriting essays for US and UK students.
Oh.
So
Is that bad or good?
in her argument, it's bad because it means that African knowledge is not acknowledged as such, right? So, but I guess the question is more broadly, if mobile internet and ICT education is successful, where did these children end up? Because the Kenyan example is actually that there's a bit of a cul-de-sac that becomes very strange, and so you get into content moderating industries and also these kind of fakes that are forgery that are actually quite authentic works of scholarship being presented elsewhere. So is there a risk that there's sort of, if the things you're studying are successful, that there's actually not a kind of economic corollary later in life for children who are educated using internet tools?
That's a tough one.
I mean, it's a speculative question. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I where we're at right now, I'm not sure we're kind of operating at that margin, because we have like children that are not able to read at a 10-year-old level and so on. So that's basically, those kind of basic skills, primary school level kids we want to take away from school. That's what we're studying, and that's where we're at.
So is anyone studying the older cohorts, above 16?
Not that I'm aware of in this setting. Well, okay, so I can escape this one by
I mean, it's not a totally fair question. I just was curious. If
no,
you
but
have
I have another paper where we look at political efficacy and kind of a sense of. So it's not related to labor market outcomes, but it's related to adults receiving more information from the same kind of sources, right? And an increased political engagement and increased ability to kind of hold leaders accountable and to feel that they're able to critically assess the government and so on. So that's a study that we kind of look at adults, but not in terms of educational outcomes, but more in terms of kind of certainty about political assessments and so on. That's not an answer to your question, but it's the closest I get at this point. Sorry, I don't have anything from the top of my head to kind of.
No, thank you for trying.
Thank you.
Göran, you're getting a microphone.
I like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Two questions. One has to do with the parallel expansion to the ICT is an expansion of electricity. And it has moved rapidly. I mean, over the 10 years from, I think, in Tanzania, from 15%.
Probably put the microphone a bit closer to your mouth.
15% to 60% or something.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that ICT comes after electricity.
Yes.
So if there is a correlation, both over time and spatially, between electricity and ICT, would your fixed effects deal with that really? Or is it a confounder? And then my second one, that's just a suggestion for the possible mechanisms. And that's something that there has been quite a lot of research on it. It's on teacher absenteeism, which is just enormous. I've seen data in Uganda. It's like 30%, 50%. teachers are absent, and not because they're lazy, because they have to go and pick up a paper or consult somebody or call to a meeting and long distance. So possibly, is there scope for internet connection to reduce the need for being absent by solving issues by sending stuff?
Yeah, maybe.
I know that in the Afrobarometer, there is data on teacher absenteeism and data on
Is it
internet.
data where they ask kind of parents about their kids' schools if they have experienced teacher absence?
It's like I think they have a corruption module or something similar, and on services. And one of the I know some researchers have tried to exploit that data. Just a possible mechanism.
Yes, that's great. Electricity confounder. I mean, it could be we can control for district level time trends, but if electricity is rolled out varying within the district, and there are different, that could be a confounder, I guess. But I think actually there are questions on electricity in the data. It might even be the case that it's part of the asset index that I'm using, which is maybe not ideal. Maybe I should single it out and look at that separately rather than as part of an asset index to see if they are.
I was just thinking that one of the things electricity is doing is that you can do homeworks after 6 o'clock, because then it's just dead dark if you're in the village, and suddenly you can do schoolwork after 6. So
that's a very concrete improvements. But I think I can look at it at the household level, and I think maybe they have those types of questions. I was mentioning that it's also connected to a school survey that they do at one school per ward, and I think they also have a village survey. So maybe they have like village level indicators of electricity that I could also look at or control for, or investigate heterogeneity along that dimension or something like that. So that's a good suggestion. Teacher absenteeism, that would be, I haven't really had time to explore all the questions that are in the school survey, but I think there might be something on that. I think I've seen it in some of the survey rounds. So there could be some on that in this school survey. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar. I guess you probably are, but with the work of Tessa Bold here in Stockholm, she's been working a lot on education in African countries and on teacher absentees, but also teacher like skill level. And they have been distributing through the World Bank tests that are kind of similar to the tests we've been discussing here, a bit more difficult. And a depressingly large share of teachers are not able to complete the questions. So that's also, I guess, they can Google the answers then. No, but maybe being able to access lesson plans and so on. And as you say about absenteeism, if they can do a lot of the administrative stuff online. So that is worth looking into. Thank you.
Very good. This reminds me of an anecdote from Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, and it was exactly this about the importance of light for studying. That when he was in high school, if they want to study after dark, they have to go and get this generator going, put some oil in, some gasoline, clean the sparks, crank it up. Then you could get a few lamps to study. So it is so important. Next is, let me see, the gentleman there. You get in the microphone.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have maybe a comment leading to a question. You mentioned the sort of business case for rolling out 3G, 4G in Tanzania and Uganda as well, and how this sort of side effect of this is like access to the internet for kids in school. But I think it's also interesting to put it in a broader geopolitical context, that is sort of Chinese investment driving this 3G, 4G investment. And this is sort of very strategic politically. And this ties into a little bit about maybe an assumption that it's not only what the kids look at on the internet or how they use the internet, but what internet they're looking at. And this can change very dramatically. So it can be used by states to monitor and surveil, but also sort of push certain narratives to certain communities. And we've seen this being done very effectively based on geography, based on demographics. So I think maybe this is something for follow-up studies. If Felicia goes and does case study work, this could be something like, are they even accessing the same services at the same speed across different geographical locations?
So what kind of apps are they using, for instance, and if it's a Chinese involvement?
Or more sort of, if you and I Google something, we come up with, there's different answers because the algorithm sort of shaped that way. But you can, states can, and different actors can use this so that, what worldviews are being presented to the kids when they try and find different information. I mean, you can even have different syllabi for different communities very easily doing this.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and kind of relates to the other work I was mentioning that looks more like political effects. Also, I have been working a bit on Chinese aid projects, so a few years back. So I find that extremely interesting. I'm not aware though. What part of I haven't looked into kind of the different mobile operators and which infrastructure is who's behind which infrastructure and so on. I haven't looked into that, but that could be something for future work for sure. Surveillance, the algorithm. I'm applying for research funds actually. Looking into more the political side of things, and it would be interesting to kind of look at how governments use internet shutdowns and how. I mean, there's the famous example of speaking about China when they helped to install. Was it the headquarters of the African Union in Addis, and they instructed a kind of spyware everywhere, or constructed that. So yeah. Well, I'm getting a bit tired now, so the questions are not very my responses are not very eloquent. I'm sorry, but interesting, and I take it with me for future work.
Emma.
Hey, thanks. I was thinking about the different types of skills, and it seems that they're a little bit political somehow. I mean, like. English, you show this graph that English skills are going down, but Swahili skills are going up. And then maybe I would imagine maybe it's sort of trendy to be very savvy in Swahili, but not in English as a kind of post-colonial middle class statement. Or, I mean, I'm really not savvy here, but maybe. And then maybe, so if you would do the same analysis for each type of skill, you think the trends would be consistent?
I do though, and it is actually. But for English, I think I read some reports from Uvesto themselves, and they were kind of puzzled by the English results. But if I'm not mistaken, secondary school in Tanzania is in English, and the primary school is in Swahili, and we've seen. Negative trends, I think, in enrollment in secondary school. That's something on my extra slides. If you didn't get enough slides, now it's some time for some extra slides somewhere. Okay, lower secondary school. We see a spike in like 2010, and this is kind of the period I'm looking at. So we see a reduction again in wrong wrong one. This one in secondary schooling. So maybe that's could be something to do with the decrease in English. I don't know how political it is. I don't know, but Tanzania is. It's not that. My experience is that it's not that ethnically.
Okay, again, it was
kind of
just a
salient,
hypothesis.
But surely, I mean, Swahili is not the mother tongue of very few people,
Yeah,
even in Tanzania.
No. There's a
It's
lot of
multilingual country.
Yeah, a lot of local languages, but I think they've been favoring Swahili kind of nation building since way back, so they have it in schools. But yeah, I memean, especially as you were touching upon before as well, if comparing with Uganda and with the local language and so on, it's. I was looking at because in Uganda they refer to it as local languages, depending on which local language they're. But in Tanzania, there are too many of them, I guess, and so they're simply focusing on Swahili.
I think it's over 100.
Yeah. It would be a mess to administer that test in literacy, I guess. Yeah.
Very good. Emma, were you satisfied?
I had a little follow-up. I mean, maybe because internet is often in English, at least the way I know it. So maybe it would be a very strong effect on English skills, but not Swahili skills, maybe.
Yeah, I would assume so. That was my prior as well. But then I actually read something about where they were kind of pushing for a lot of content in local languages coming up, so I don't know. There's been a rapid growth of apps in Swahili apparently. But yeah, that was what I expected to see. But looking at comparing across the different the separate subjects and see the similar pattern there. So
thanks a lot. Thank you for this very interesting talk. And
thanks for great comments and suggestion, you guys. I'm gonna write this up on the train. Thank you.
We have some talks coming up. June 4th, we have Quill Kukla talking about healthism, neurodiversity, and respectability politics. She's coming from University Hannover, philosopher. And then Julia Jibril going to talk about technical innovation facing climate change on June 11th from University Bern. And then we have Ellie Cook. Choose your own captivity, choice architects and the analog origins of digital capitalism. I connect to this. You're very welcome then. Thanks.
Thank you.